evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It's January 26th, 2025. I'm your host, Nate Pike. Two shows in as many nights. I feel like I could be a Vegas headliner at this point. Wow. This week, though, for anybody who's unfamiliar, before we get into the dumpster fire, the debacle that we have to talk about, that was the last week in Alberta politics. If you missed it, well, last night we had a conversation with a couple of the organizers, three of the organizers from the AB Resistance, and they announced that they're starting the first steps of doing a recall in Calgary Bow, which is the constituency of MLA and Minister of Education Dimitris Nicolaides. So that's spicy, a little bit fun, worth checking out if you hop on our YouTube. It's in the back catalog now. Tonight's going to be a little, you know what? We're going to do the rundown that we normally do for the first chunk of the show. At the last half of the show, we're going to be doing a little bit of a thought experimenty type thing. So you may want to brace yourselves because we're going to go some places tonight. But let's get right started with the beginning of the week. Donald Trump. How is it? How broken is Alberta politics that I'm going to start a show about Alberta politics talking about not just the swearing in of the new American president, but also Donald Trump? This is where we are, Alberta. This is relevant. Trump got sworn in. So that was a thing that happened. And then Elon Musk. Oh, I think our Twitter Spaces might get shut down tonight. Elon Musk threw. And here's the thing, folks. There's a lot of people who are calling it a gesture. There's a lot of people who are making all kinds of excuses. There's a lot of people who are saying, oh, it's because he's neurospicy. No. That is a fucking Nazi gesture. Period. End of sentence. I don't have a problem saying that because he didn't just do it once. He did it twice. It's a fucking Nazi salute. There's no such thing as a Roman salute. That is Wikipedia that. It doesn't exist. It's not anything that was certainly culturally identified with the Roman Empire. That is some straight up Nazi bullshit. And there's no getting around it. And if we're afraid to say it like it is, then we have much, much, much bigger problems. Because the reality is, I have a real problem on a boatload of levels with the argument of, oh, you can't get mad at him for doing that. He was speaking from his heart and he's neurodivergent. Nope. Because here's the thing. There's lots of people who are all over the autism spectrum who can get through their day without going up on stage at a rally in front of thousands and through the interwebs millions, and they don't throw Nazi salutes. So it's not a neurodivergent thing. It's not an autism thing. That is a lazy excuse, and it's unmitigated bullshit. The reality is, somebody like the dude wants to go to Mars. The dude wants to go to Mars. He's built or paid people to build him rockets that can land and get grabbed out of the air with giant robot arms. You don't get to say that he didn't know what he was doing. You don't get to say that he was unaware of what he was doing. And the reason why, and I hate that I'm having to start the show off by talking about Elon Musk through a Nazi salute, because there is Alberta stuff, and we're going to get to it, I promise, but there is some dangerous overlap here. Because the reality is when people who are in high profiles, when they are in positions of ostensibly leadership, and they start yeeting around Nazi salutes, it doesn't take very long before actual Nazis in Alberta get actually comfortable throwing around Nazi salutes. This is a post from the mayor of St. Albert in Alberta. St. Albert. That's supposed to be one of the nice places. And we've got three idiots, racists, Nazis, who are out on the street corner. And what these yo-yos are doing is they're holding up, among other things, they're holding up signs. They had different versions of the signs. One of them said, "Deport them all," to which I always look at all of the First Nations folks and say, please don't. And because it would be everybody but the First Nations folks is what I'm doing there. And White Lives Matter. Now, there will always be people who make excuses for all of that sort of bullshit. But those weren't the only things that they were doing. Those weren't the only symbols that they were throwing up. Because while one of these Nazis was throwing out the Elon Musk heartfelt gesture, no, it's a fucking Nazi salute, he was holding up his sign with "Deport them all." If you look at the other picture, you can see one of those guys is holding up a flag that has the white Celtic cross, which is a white supremacist symbol. So the moral of the story is when people in positions of leadership and authority throw out fucking Nazi salutes, and there is a hesitation to condemn it. There is a hesitation to say, "Oh, no, that's not okay. That is unacceptable. That was a Nazi salute." There are people who are going to think it was a Nazi salute, like the Nazis I just showed you, and that's not okay. But instead, because Elon Musk has more money than God, apparently there's a boatload of people who want to err on calling it a heartfelt gesture. You look at the expression on the man's face as he's throwing that salute. That was not a, I'm overwhelmed by emotion and I have all of the warm fuzzies and I feel so happy right now. That's not what that is. That is anger. That is contempt. That is not warm fuzzies. So, no. And there's plenty of other anecdotal evidence, but it has been mind-blowing to watch. I hate when I have to use this term, mainstream media, legacy media, instead of saying, yeah, it's a Nazi salute. Instead of saying, yeah, there's people who are going to think it's a Nazi salute. We need to make sure that everybody knows that's bad. They're calling it a gesture. And it's just not. It's not. So that was day one. Sunday night, though, there was optimism to be had in the province of Alberta because the word came in, oh, you know what? Maybe the tariffs, maybe not so much with the tariffs. And everybody did the victory lap. We had the Danielle Smith came out and she put up a great big post where this time her graphic didn't cover up the Canadian flag entirely. But she put up a great big post where she talked about, hey, you know what? So good, great news. Not that Donald Trump isn't going to do the tariffs. He's gonna study the issue. Everything's going to be fine. Here's what we need to do, said Danielle Smith. We need to focus on diplomacy and not talk about retaliatory measures. We need to negotiate more ways to buy from one another. Because if we buy more American stuff, then Donald will be less upset about the trade differential, and that's good too, right? So we want to make sure that we do that. Double down on border security, announce a major acceleration of Canada's 2% of GDP NATO target, crack down on immigration streams and loopholes that are known to permit individuals hostile to Canada and the United States to enter our country, immediately repeal all federal anti-energy policies. And again, this is another one of those, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we misrepresented the reasons why a lot of those major projects that, and I say this as an Albertan, a lot of Albertans like to trot out and be like, look, we're the victims. Northern Gateway. People like to talk about Northern Gateway as an example of a project that was unfairly taken away from us. And again, it's a lot more complex than that. There were major environmental issues, major environmental assessments that said we do not have the capacity to deal with the spill if we put this pipeline in here. We have major problems. We don't have the infrastructure to support this pipeline. And that's what ultimately killed it before Prime Minister Justin Trudeau put the final nail in the coffin. But the body was already in the coffin and the lid was on. Justin Trudeau just put the last nail in. That's the reality of the situation. Same thing with Energy East. It is mind-boggling to me, and I know I've said this before, I'm going to keep saying it. It's mind-boggling to me that we live in a province that defines itself by its sovereignty, at least since Danielle Smith got elected, and we get to do what we want within our own borders, and nobody else in Canada gets to force us to do anything that we don't want to because we're Alberta, damn it. But we're not willing to extend that same position to other provinces. Quebec shut down Energy East, no question. Did they have a right to do that? Yeah, they did. It sucks. And hopefully, given the current situation, there are conversations to be had around that, but we don't even know if there's a business case for that thing anymore. So it's complicated. And to just lean into the grievance politics of the day doesn't do anything to move the major conversation forward. But Danielle Smith wasn't the only person who took the bizarre little mission accomplished victory lap that she did. And this one hurts me. This one honestly does hurt me. Because we also saw some columnists, and I keep wanting Rick to get it right. I keep wanting him to just stop leaning into the stenography. But even Rick Bell from the Calgary Sun, from Post Media, tweeted out inappropriately, a little too early in the morning, 8:36 in the morning. Latest, no tariffs against Canada for now. Smith must be feeling good. The Sunday interview. Danielle Smith stands firm, slams Trudeau as Trump takes power. So you see what we did there. Rather than thinking maybe we should wait to see, everybody took their great big victory lap, and it did not go so great because shortly after the inauguration, while he was signing executive orders, Trump got the question.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
When do you think you would enact those?
I think February 1st.
Are you planning on giving notice of that?
I think we'll do it February 1st.
25% on both.
So it didn't take very long for Donald Trump to turn around and say, no, we're doing the tariff still. It's just going to be February 1st. We're going to give him like a week and a half. It's almost as if he was deliberately jerking an entire country, well, two entire countries chained, to be fair, in order to stoke a little bit of division. But it didn't stop there. Because on Wednesday, Trump went to, and I love saying this, the World Economic Forum. He went to the WEF. Well, he did. He went virtually. But he had some thoughts to share there, and he doubled down there as well.
One thing we're going to be demanding is we're going to be demanding respect from other nations. Canada, we have a tremendous deficit with Canada. We're not going to have that anymore. We can't do it. I don't know if it's good for them. As you probably know, I say you can always become a state. And if you're a state, we won't have a deficit. We won't have to tariff you, et cetera, et cetera. But Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years. And it's not fair that we should have a $200 billion or $250 billion deficit. We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need their oil and gas.
So there's a piece of that clip. I'm going to plant some seeds as we go through this episode, but there's a piece of that clip that I want you to pay particular attention to, because Donald Trump doubled down again and again on the Canada can become the 51st state bit. And this is important because this goes back weeks. This was not just like him making an offhand comment about, Canada could become the 51st state and then they wouldn't have to pay any of these tariffs because they'd just be on our side of the border. It would be delightful. That's not what he's doing here. This is a line that Trump has been literally pushing for weeks. It's a line that many politicians have dismissed as, oh, he's just kidding around. And if he was just kidding around, you'd think he'd have some better joke writers, because it didn't take very long for him to say it again.
A nation. Also, they've been very nasty to us on trade. Historically, Canada has been very, very bad to us, very unfair to us on trade. So we'll see how it all works out. I would love to see Canada be the 51st state. The Canadian citizens, if that happened, would get a very big tax cut, tremendous tax cut, because they're very highly taxed. and you wouldn't have to worry about military. You wouldn't have to worry about many of the things. You'd have better health coverage. You'd have much better health coverage. So I think the people of Canada would like it, if it's explained. But just to start off, they'd have a massive tax cut, and they'd have a lot more business, because then we'd let business go to Canada.
So, again, to be clear, Donald Trump at another separate press conference saying, hey, you know what? Sure would be great if Canada just joined as the 51st state. And this is one of the pieces that we're going to talk about a little bit later on in the show, because it's part of the conversation that for some reason, a lot of the powers that be have just kind of cruised past. They haven't paid attention to that line. And that is really, quite frankly, problematic. Because again, one of the things that we see people assuming, and this is what cost, in many ways, too many assessments, the NDP, the last election. This also is one of the things that many people have said cost the Democrats the election against Donald Trump. And that is this assumption that there are certain rules, there are certain norms that are sacrosanct. They're sacred. Nobody would ever cross those lines. Nobody would ever do those sorts of things. We have to have the assumption that the other side is going to behave in some sort of rational and reasonable way. And what people maybe need to start wrapping their heads around a little bit more, and we're going to do the thought exercise later on in the show, is the idea that maybe some of those norms, maybe that some of those assumptions, maybe they don't hold water anymore. Because it didn't even take to the end of Trump's first term until a Republican House member introduced a resolution to amend the 22nd article of the 22nd Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to change the number of terms that a president can sit for. Historically, there's been a limitation on the 22nd Amendment put into place that has a president can only serve 2 terms. That's what they can do. They can't serve a 3rd term. You get 2 terms, that's it. That's what the American Constitution says. That's the assumption that everybody goes into all of these elections with. And here we have a Republican House member, Representative Andy Ogles of Tennessee, introduced the measure days after Trump was sworn in for a second non-consecutive term in the White House. So already, we have Republicans who are introducing bills in the hopes of them becoming laws to change the United States Constitution to say, hey, maybe it just won't be just 4 more years with Trump. Maybe it could be 8. And if that's a possibility, then one of the things that people need to start thinking about is maybe the game plan isn't just 4 years. Maybe the game plan goes a little bit longer than that. Like I said, we're going to talk about that a little bit more, a little bit later on in the show. But before we do, we're going to get to the Alberta part, because Danielle Smith held a second press conference, I guess we could call it. And again, it's weird. There's so much in the last week that has just been weird. Danielle Smith's first press conference. That press conference wasn't held using government channels. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, the way that press conferences normally work is the government of Alberta has their YouTube channel, and they have all of their other socials and ways that they push information out. Normally, when the Premier of Alberta, as the Premier of Alberta, has a press conference, those press conferences are hosted on the government of Alberta websites and the YouTubes and all the places. Smith's "it wasn't a bed, it was a couch" presser did not appear in any of the normal places. There were no follow-up government emails saying Danielle Smith had a press conference and she said, everything's fine, nobody worry. Normally, there's a follow-up email when it's an official government event. It didn't happen with the definitely a couch, not a bed press conference. She had another press conference, this time apparently from the hallway of a hotel in DC. Okay, sure. And This one also didn't go through any of the government channels, but it did mark a fairly significant change in tone for the Premier of Alberta.
So if you are successful and oil and gas does get a carve out, what's your next move, and how does Alberta further respond to help the rest of the country, or does it not? And what happens if no carve out?
Well, I haven't been asking for a carve out. I've been asking for a recognition that this important trade relationship means Canada should get a carve out. That Canada has got a special integrated relationship with the U.S. That Canada buys more U.S. goods and services than any other country in the world. That Canada is able to singularly be able to provide that security to the United States. And that's again, I think we have a very strong case to make with oil and gas as one component. But whether it's uranium or germanium or any of the other critical minerals, we've got a very strong case to make. And so that's why I say let's go in with some confidence and let's. I think that's the true Team Canada approach. I don't anticipate a carve out. I never have, but I have been asking for Canada to have a carve out.
Now, there's a lot to unpack there, because I don't know how somebody says, hey, I'm going to put a tariff on your country. And your response is, I would like a carve out on that tariff on my country for my country, which would mean no tariffs. So I'm not sure what we're carving things. It's all very confusing. But I mean, it's not like Danielle Smith has explicitly put out social media and graphics that have said that she's absolutely pursuing an Alberta first approach. It's not like she's, oh, wait, that's exactly what she's done. She did an interview with Rick Bell, where she said, I campaigned on putting Alberta first, and this is what it looks like. We're not going to sacrifice Alberta's interests for the short-term political interests of the current prime minister. That is a graphic that she made and put together. She's also had more than a couple of social media tweets that would very reasonably lead people to believe that she's not advocating for Canada, she's advocating for Alberta. The Mar-a-Lago tweet. Over the last 24 hours, I had the opportunity to meet President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago last night. At his golf course this morning, we had a friendly and constructive conversation, which I emphasized the mutual importance of U.S.-Canadian energy relationship, and specifically how thousands of American jobs are supported by energy goods from Alberta. Danielle Smith, again, just a couple of days earlier, Canada is a strong, independent nation with the 9th largest economy in the world, and our southern neighbor benefits from this economic strength. We're the United States' best customer. We buy more products and services from the U.S. than any other single nation, and more than Germany, UK, France, Italy, and Vietnam combined. We can strengthen our partnership even further in the coming years by securing our shared border and fighting unfair Chinese trade practices that harm workers in both of our countries. I will continue to share with Americans the economic story Alberta has to tell, and that's why we'll be in Washington during the inauguration. So, yeah, she has been pushing an Alberta first narrative. There's no getting around that. And there is a sane argument to be made that, well, she's the Premier of Alberta. So of course she's supposed to do that. But a lot of people have been criticizing Danielle Smith, rightfully so, because pardon me, because rather than getting on board with Team Canada and all of the other premiers, she's struck out and done her own thing. She has said that she will not tolerate, she will not accept any sort of retaliatory tariffs that negatively impact Alberta, specifically Alberta oil and gas. We haven't heard Danielle Smith talking about the other Alberta industries. It's all been Alberta oil and gas all of the time. So it's reasonable that people would look at that with some suspicion. And that's that chunk of the Danielle Smith stuffs, kind of, because the next thing that we have to talk about also overlaps with Danielle Smith and Mar-a-Lago, and it might be a couple of other things as well. Talking about the Wonder Valley now, which is it's turning out maybe not so wonderful, maybe a little bit more complicated than maybe people initially thought. So, by way of background, on December 9th, Wonder Valley AI Data Park near Grand Prairie was announced. They did a press releases. Daniel Smith did a press release. The government of Alberta did a press release. Kevin O'Leary put out a questionably rendered CGI video of Wonder Valley springing to life. It wasn't a very good video. I'm just going to say it. It was not that great of a video, which is not super inspiring when it comes to we're going to do AI stuffs. Like if you can't even get a CG video, I have some questions. But they put out their Wonder Valley press release, and they announced what the plan is. So for anybody who's unfamiliar on the broad specifics, the idea is because AI uses a tremendous amount of energy to AI, they want to start by building a 1.4 gigawatt power station that will power the initial phases. That's going to be powered by geothermal and natural gas. That's the initial start, but then it's going to build up until it's actually consuming 7.5 gigawatts. The investment that they're talking about in order to get this private AI park up and running is $70 billion. But there's already been some pretty big problems. From the press release that they put out again on December 9th, one of our core values for the project is to engage with First Nations, Indigenous communities to create a mutually beneficial relationship and one that honors the people and the lands for many years to come, said Paul Palangian, who's the CEO of O'Leary Ventures. Except that very much didn't happen. And it didn't take very long before it became very, very clear that there had been no consultation. The Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation started to express some concerns, and they released a letter addressing those concerns. They put it up as an open letter, and they put it up as a cease and desist letter as well. And they asked for some additional clarification. And this is really, really important. One of the things that they asked for clarification on, Mr. O'Leary stated on Fox News, Danielle Smith is very friendly with the Trump administration. She's provided a permit for me for thousands of acres, 200 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. This is going to be the most low-cost energy in America. And look, if it's a huge project, I got to raise $70 billion, but I'm moving all over the world with her, and I've been flying every sovereign wealth fund that will take a meeting, and we're off to the races. We're going to have a clip for that in just a sec. But they also had some questions as well. And some of these questions are really, really important. One of them had to do with funding for the AI data center. And this gets a little abstract, but really important really quick. So Mr. O'Leary implies that the Premier traveled with him and that O'Leary and the Premier were meeting with proposed foreign investors, sovereign wealth funds. Did the Premier travel internationally with Mr. O'Leary in support of this project? If so, who did the Premier meet with and when? We would like to know the nature of the discussions in any such meetings. In regards to the permit, Mr. O'Leary alleges that the Premier gave him a permit for 200 acres and possibly for 200 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Did the Premier give a permit to Mr. O'Leary? If so, we request a copy of the application and the permit and any consultation regarding the issuance of the permit. And at this point, it should be clear. If that First Nation is saying, hey, we'd like to know what consultation y'all think you did, that means it wasn't with them. Water licenses. Greenview states that they have water licenses, presumably for the Smoky River, which is our water source. Is this true? If so, how and when did they acquire water licenses? Please provide us with the documentation regarding the license, including the consultation records. Regulatory applications. We would like to know what applications have been submitted to provincial regulators in relation to this project, including to the Alberta Utilities Commission and the Alberta Energy Regulator. All provinces of this scale require regulatory approvals, and in accordance with the Constitution and Treaty Number 8, they require consultation and accommodation with our nation when they impact or could impact a traditional territory. Advising a private investor. And this is where the rubber really kind of meets the road. As suggested by Mr. Glubish, we would like to know whether and how the Crown, which is the government, has been advising this proponent on how to navigate the regulatory framework. These statements raise at least the appearance of a conflict of interest. And it's true, because if the Premier of Alberta is picking and choosing which projects she's going to support, if she's traveling with Mr. O'Leary in order to lend legitimacy to the project, when there have been no public announcements that this is in any way a publicly funded project. There's been no public announcement saying that the government of Alberta or the taxpayers of Alberta have any stake in this project at all. At best, this project is going to consume a tremendous amount of natural gas and electricity and create maybe a few hundred jobs at the most. But as the Cree Nation is very justified in asking, they'd like to know what the environmental impacts are, please. Well, we got some maybe kind of sort of answers to some of those questions over the last couple of weeks because Mr. Leary really likes to do interviews.
And one of her associates called me months ago and said, why don't you bring any of this capital to Canada? I said, well, Danielle, everybody knows you can't get permits. Gerald Butts changed that way back. You're powerless to do anything. It's a shame, and that's why the Canadian dollar has collapsed, and that's why GDP per capita has collapsed. That's why debt per capita is up. Butts, as you recall, was doing all the policy for Joe in his first majority mandate, and he put in place legislation that pulled the permitting to Ottawa, and then he declined to do any permits. So you can't get anything done in Canada. But she said to me, no, I sued Gerald Butts and Trudeau back in October of 2023, and I won in the Supreme Court. I have the right to offer you a permit. I said, well, that's a new story, because with the Trudeau peso, the Canadian dollar is worthless now. Everything's selling at a massive discount. Maybe I should come look. And I sent a team up there, and we started with a helicopter looking at sites for data centers that she suggested we look at. And Carl Agren, he's the granddaddy of data centers, flew in from Abu Dhabi, and he's actually an American. It was an officer that built the first data centers, the hypercenters. Probably the most well-known guy. He's on my team now. And after he landed, because he didn't have any cell service in the helicopter, he got off the chopper. I could still hear the blades whirling, and he said, "Buy it all. They have a unicorn here. Buy it all. This thing is incredible. I've never seen anything like it." And that was the beginning of our relationship, and she was able to deliver the permits. So I'm bringing back $70 billion back to Alberta. I think I'm one of the first to bring capital back. And Danielle, I said to her, look, Danielle, nobody believes you. You're going to have to get on the road with me to visit sovereign wealth funds all around the world. And we're going to have to tell them you're open for business, because Trudeau shut it down. As you know, he wiped out our relations with India, and
Now, that clip was compliments of Disordered YYC, everybody's favorite Receipts Twitter account. But things escalated from that. There's a couple of things in that clip that I want to draw your attention to, though. And that is where that investor flew in from. Because Kevin O'Leary was very, very clear. He had his guy fly in from Abu Dhabi. Now, we're going to do some background on this in just a sec. But before we get too far into the background piece, we want to talk about the story that broke this week from Sean Amato, because he was able to confirm from Mr. O'Leary many of the same things. This was not an O'Leary inspired project. This was somebody from the party said, "Hey, Kevin O'Leary, why don't you build a giant data center in northern Alberta?" Kevin O'Leary said that he spoke to Smith, and Smith promised him all the permits. But again, it would be easy to look at that one clip and go, I don't know, maybe that's a one-off. It's not like there's a completely separate interview that was done just this Friday where he said exactly the same thing, is there?
I received a call months and months ago from somebody in her party, and they said, listen, why aren't you bringing any of these developments to Alberta? We've got fantastic metrics.
O'Leary says he was skeptical he could get the permits, but Smith reassured him.
We set up a call with her staffers and her, and she said, look, I won a court case, a litigation against Gerald Butts in October of 2023, where I got back my rights, and I can issue permits for projects like this in province.
O'Leary publicly announced Wonder Valley south of Grand Prairie in early December. About a month later, he invited Smith to meet Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago in Florida.
I had to take Danielle Smith with me to sovereign wealth funds all around the world. And, I had to take her to Washington, and I took her to Mar-a-Lago. And we had to go convince people that...
Now, there again, we have Mr. O'Leary saying that he had to take Danielle to sovereign wealth funds. He had to do the introductions and get her in the room all the way around the world so that she could make the pitch for him. This was not Kevin O'Leary saying, hey, please, please, please. This was Danielle Smith, by the way Kevin O'Leary described it, saying, I want to come and make sure that everything's okay. And can we please make this project happen for Mr. O'Leary? And so we got curious. Hey, are there any times recently where Danielle Smith has traveled? And this is again where the appearances of a conflict of interest, the appearances of perhaps some disingenuous communications with the taxpayers of Alberta, the fact that we can ask the questions that we're about to ask is pretty problematic. Because if we go back to COP28, that's where Danielle Smith traveled with what was widely reported as being the largest, most expensive ever. Now, COP28 is the United Nations climate change conference. So it struck a lot of people as very strange that Danielle Smith was taking this massive delegation, including her husband, who, by reports, paid his own way. So, there's that. They all went down to Dubai. Now, this is where the itinerary gets to be a little pertinent, because as Danielle Smith goes down there for her massive entourage, the first few days are very, very much COP28 days. So she traveled for the first couple of days, 3-4 travel days. Only took one day to get back. Do with that what you will. But then it was all COP28 until December 6th. Then from December 7th to 11th, the premier delegation was meeting with officials and organizers from the regions of Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and Doha. Locations TBD. But we know that Danielle Smith was, in fact, in Abu Dhabi. How do we know that? Because she tweeted it out herself. On December 8th, a tremendous day of introductions and opportunity in Abu Dhabi yesterday. His Excellency Sheikh Obaid Al Khabi and Dr. Jafar Badwan from Das Holdings hosted at their head office, where we discussed partnership opportunities in technology, energy, and infrastructure. We were then hosted by His Excellency Musabi Al Khabi, the Executive Director of Low Carbon Fuel Solutions from the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC. Like Alberta's emissions reduction and energy development plan, ADNOC is focused on reducing emissions while responsibly producing energy around the global. Do with that what you will. With key energy holdings in Novo Chemicals and TAQA North, ADNOC is actively engaged in Alberta's clean energy production. Now, there's some other pieces that get to be relevant when we're talking about Abu Dhabi. One of them is Kevin O'Leary, because Kevin O'Leary actually spoke at a conference just before that event. There was a separate event, the ADFW, Abu Dhabi Financial Week. Kevin O'Leary, chairman of O'Leary Ventures, offered key insights at ADFW 2023 on the challenges in fintech and why 8 out of 10 ventures fail within 36 months. He highlighted key strategies for conducting funding aimed at long-term success and sustainability. Now, that was posted in 2024, but ADFW 2023 literally ended days before Danielle Smith got there for COP28. So it's fairly safe to speculate on the possibility that Kevin O'Leary may have been in Abu Dhabi at the same time that Danielle Smith flew in and started taking meetings, not in Dubai where COP28 was, but in Abu Dhabi. And where it gets even more is Kevin O'Leary isn't just a citizen of Canada. If you take a look, Kevin O'Leary has 3 citizenships. Now, by most reports, he currently lives in Florida, but he has 3 citizenships. One of them is in Canada, one of them is in Ireland, and one of them is in the United Arab Emirates, which is where Abu Dhabi is. And you don't have to go through much of Kevin O'Leary's social media to see videos of him in Abu Dhabi talking about how important Abu Dhabi is. It's the capital of capital, he likes to call it. It's where all of the money lives. And it's not like Danielle Smith went back to Dubai mysteriously just a year later. Oh, no, wait, that's, of course, exactly what she did. In November of this year, she jumped on an additional delegation to go back to Dubai and the Northern Emirates. So Danielle Smith really likes to spend a lot of time in this part of the world. Kevin O'Leary says that this is the best place in the world to raise money. His guy who approved the purchase of the land in order for Kevin O'Leary to start this project, according to Kevin O'Leary, came from Abu Dhabi. But let's go back to the original mission that Smith did, where she met with folks not in Dubai, where COP28 was happening, but in Abu Dhabi, because people asked what's going on there. And there was a statement that was issued by the Premier's press secretary. The Premier's delegation met with officials from Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Doha to discuss investment opportunities in the energy, infrastructure, education, and transportation sectors, Sam Mraiche, the Premier's press secretary, said in a statement. He said the Premier promoted the province's strength as a world-class destination for business and investment. Major deals or investments can take many months or years to secure. We will continue to work on those opportunities as we move forward. So, all of that being said, it is not entirely unreasonable to ask the question, did Danielle Smith use the taxpayers' money to go down to COP28 and then duck out of COP28 a few days early so that she could go plug this private business venture with Kevin O'Leary? We don't know. That's never been disclosed. But the fact that the situation has evolved in the way that it has, where that's a reasonable question to ask, is reflective of the fact that this is not being handled in an ethical way. And as the Sturgeon Cree Nation pointed out, there is at the very least the appearance of a conflict of interest. Because if Danielle Smith was using that trip in any way to promote private business interests, then she was using taxpayers' money to lobby, in effect, for private investors. Her job is not to work for private investors who don't even live in the province. Her job is to work for Albertans. And the fact that there was apparently almost no consultation done, if any, with First Nations before Danielle Smith issued permits, which is not how any of this is supposed to work, because the AER and the Alberta Utilities Commission are supposed to be the ones who are evaluating all of these things. The fact that Kevin O'Leary is saying that Danielle Smith put a giant bow on this thing and then traveled the world to help him raise the money is deeply, deeply problematic. Moving on from there, we got a couple more topics that we got to hit on real quick here. The first one has to do with the task force on the COVID report, because there's some problems. There's some very real issues that are going on with the COVID report that was publicly released this week. This is a $2 million report. And this is a report, the members of which were heavily questioned for not being experts in their field. One of the main leaders of this report is a doctor who, by his own admission at the Injection of Truth tinfoil hat convention, said that he hasn't been able to work since COVID because of his extreme views. This is a group of physicians who have recommended hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. Anybody should have been able to use them willy-nilly. And in fact, the report came out with their list of recommendations. The Globe and Mail did an excellent report on it. And we got to talk about some of these recommendations for a second, because the task force recommends halting the use of COVID-19 vaccines without full disclosure of their potential risks, ending their use in healthy children and teenagers, conducting further research into their effectiveness, establishing support for vaccine-injured individuals, and providing an opt-out mechanism from federal public health policy. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, because the way that the full disclosure of potential risks works is anytime that a medication, a vaccine, anything has been used, it's been tested, anything that has happened to any patients in that time period has to be reported as a potential adverse outcome, because you can't say for sure that it wasn't related. So, and this is an extreme example, if somebody got their COVID-19 shot, walked outside, and got hit by a car, that could, by some, be argued to be a potential adverse effect. It's not. It's ridiculous. And when you take a look at the frequency of these adverse effects, it's incredibly low. And all of that stuff is readily accessible as it stands now anyways. So it's not great to say that there has to be this full disclosure of the potential risks. But where it gets to start to be really problematic is when they say they want to end the use in healthy children and teenagers. Because as further research has demonstrated, COVID-19 is an inflammatory disease. And its effects can be, in certain people, cumulative, which means the more you get it, the worse things are down the road. And so to just say, we'll see what we see, is reflective not of the evidence of the medicine, but it's reflective of the fear-mongering that has gone on and persists in regards to the safety and the efficacy of vaccines for COVID. The task force concluded federal and provincial health authorities took a restrictive approach to certain drugs, including ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, which is hydroxychloroquine used to treat malaria, ivermectin, an anti-parasite. The medical community has been very, very clear. Neither of these things work for COVID-19. There's some folks who believe they do. They're wrong, because there's no evidence to support that. There's literally no evidence to support that. And in fact, the paper, as we talked about on a previous episode, the paper that claimed to have the correlation between hydroxychloroquine and curing COVID, that paper was just recently withdrawn because it was of such poor quality. So again, to argue that the governing bodies, whether it's the federal government or provincial health authorities or federal health authorities, did not allow physicians to prescribe medications that would not have worked. There was no evidence to suggest that they would have worked and could have, in fact, potentially caused harm. To say that those bodies overreached by literally protecting the public from physicians who wanted to do things without any evidence for doing the things is not great. That's why those bodies are supposed to exist. The panel also said that Alberta should protect public discussion of alternative medical treatments, so just leaning right into the woo science, under the Provincial Human Rights Act, and advise the government to prevent regulatory bodies from using professional or codes of conduct to obstruct the use of approved medications for off-label use. And this gets nuts, because there are all sorts of medications that if you give them to the wrong person in the wrong health condition, it can have catastrophic effects, if not kill them. And if the argument is, well, if a doctor wants to give a medicine, they should just be allowed to do it, and professional bodies should not be allowed to hold those doctors responsible. I'm going to go back to the basil. If somebody walked into an emergency room and they had their arm torn off in a thresher, and a doctor said, you know what'll work for that? Basil. We'll put some basil on it. And that person then proceeded to bleed out and die. This paper, this report, is making the argument they shouldn't be held accountable for that by their professional regulatory body. It's insanity. It also recommended halting disciplinary action against healthcare workers for promoting or using these medications. So if I, full disclosure, I work as a paramedic. I am a registered paramedic in the province of Alberta. If I, as a paramedic, was to go to a car accident and find a person with their arm ripped off and go, you know what? I bet I'll work on that. Basil. Then I shouldn't be held responsible. I shouldn't be held accountable. I shouldn't have any sort of disciplinary action for putting Basil on an amputation. Let me be clear. If I was to, I never would, but if I was to ever go to a car accident and find somebody who was bleeding out and respond with Basil, not only should I have disciplinary action, I should 100% lose my ability to practice. Period. End of sentence. And if you can't get on board with that, I don't even know what to tell you. But where it gets really nuts is the panel also suggested that media is politically or financially compensated by public health or pharmaceutical contracts and said the government should require the press to publicly disclose any affiliations. So you see, Big Pharma controls the media. We are so far down tinfoil hat lane, it's ridiculous. And it wouldn't be bad. I mean, it would be bad. It's bad no matter what. Let's just be clear about that. But we as taxpayers pay $2 million to have this group of writers weigh in on issues that most people at face reading would argue they're not necessarily qualified to make these determinations on. There's certainly questions to be asked, because when they went on with the media stuff, they said when reporting on health-related matters, require media to cite levels of supporting evidence, publicly disclose any political or financial competing interests that may influence their reporting, including publicly disclosing the dollar value and the conditions of their public health and pharmaceutical contracts. I just want to be really clear for everybody. The breakdown does not have any contracts with any pharmaceutical organizations. I don't have a problem saying that. I don't think that there are very many news organizations, if any, that do. But again, when you can't eliminate the argument, when you can't say, okay, well, I don't actually have any evidence that hydroxychloroquine works that is in any kind of trial. I don't have any kind of evidence that ivermectin works that's in any sort of verifiable controlled trial. I don't have any evidence of any of those things. I guess I'm wrong. When you're not willing to say that because you have to hold on to this idea that these two things, which have no evidence for working, could potentially work, the only route that you have left, if you can't attack the argument, is to attack the person making the argument. And when you resort to those sorts of attacks, it's far more telling about what your position is than what their position is. But if you really think about it, the argument that they're making for the standards that media, which is a wonderfully broad term. This is a reason why we don't call ourselves journalists. The notion that all media should be held to these standards of disclosure and competing interests and all of those things, that would actually hold media to a higher standard than what they want from the people actually practicing the healthcare, which is, I mean, I can think of a couple of media organizations that I would love to see a full disclosure of their financials, cough True North, cough Western Standard. But I also recognize that as private companies, they're under no obligation to do that. And journalist isn't a protected title. So there's that. Moving on from there, we got to talk. So I want to be clear. We got a couple irons in the fire on this issue, because the coal piece is so complex, and it has so been misrepresented. And unfortunately, we have a government that can't seem to get their story straight in regards to what they're doing on coal, why they're doing it. They can't get a public narrative out there that in any way concisely or clearly explains what the goals of the provincial government are when it comes to coal, which is making a lot of people very, very nervous. That ramped up this week because there was direction given on January 15th. It wasn't actually released by the AER until the 20th, but Brian Jean, God help us all, wrote another letter. And in that letter to the chairman of the board of directors of the AER, he rescinded the ministerial orders that they put the suspension of all approvals for coal mining in Alberta. So there were no new approvals that could go forward with these ministerial orders in place. He lifted those rules. And he made a fascinating argument that we're going to get into. I'm also directing the AR to continue to apply the restrictions in place in respect to the exploration for and the development of coal within categories of land as described in the 1976 coal development policy when evaluating coal exploration and development applications with due consideration given to the coal industry modernization initiative policy guidance set out in the Government of Alberta news release titled Protecting the Environment with Tougher Coal Rules, dated December 20th, 2024. We're going to take a look at that press conference in just a second. Of course, coal exploration and development in Category 1 lands, which include national and provincial parks and wildlife sanctuaries, has never been allowed, and this will continue to be the case. It is wild when we have these government officials who use their letters to regulatory bodies, not to conduct business, but rather to issue press releases. Because I don't think that you say to the director of the AER or the chairman of the board of the directors of the AER, of course, coal exploration development in Category 1 lands, which includes national, provincial parks, and wildlife sanctuaries, has never been allowed, and this will continue to be the case. I'm going to explain the very, very base level of this to you, the chairman of the board. These lines are always included for public consumption. It's advertising, is what it is. But we got to talk about the nuances here, because Brian Jean, since this new coal policy came out, has been saying no new coal mines. And the interpretations are different. Nigel Banks, an emeritus professor of law at the University of Calgary, said of the rescission of these orders, it means that projects that have already got exploration permits, those permits are now effectively reinstated and exploration can start again on those properties. The Eastern Slopes is open again for coal activities. Now, let's let Brian speak to what these changes meant, because you should probably have a conversation with the Premier.
You keep saying that you will not allow open pit coal mining, but that's quite disingenuous given the fact that this will not apply to, for example, Grassy Mountain or any other exempt project, which will be open pit coal mining. And I know you're saying no new open pit, but when you're saying no open pit mining, and this doesn't apply to Grassy Mountain, how do you expect Albertans to actually look at this and say, yeah, no, that's a fair go, let's go for it?
Well, Emma, I appreciate the question. I hope they look at us and say, wow, that's smart. What a smart government, because they're actually looking at something that wasn't reclaimed properly. They're going to require the company to reclaim it properly, and at the same time, they're going to be able to do it economically and not cause any environmental problems. I think it's a great solution, and we have to look around the province for other opportunities. There's a lot of brownfields, a lot of contamination, and a lot of contaminated sites left by previous governments, including the federal government, and we need to find innovative ways to clean those up. And we're going to. Grassy Mountain is no exception to that. We're going to be very, very closely monitoring this and dealing with the AER to make sure that this is done in the most responsible way possible without affecting the people's lives and the environment in a negative way.
I mean, you kind of spun that answer there, Minister, with all due respect. I did say that, this does not apply to open pit mining when it comes to Grassy Mountain. So it's disingenuous for you to say there will not be open pit mining when, in fact, there could well be, given what happens with Grassy Mountain. But on the royalty part of this, you talked about a substantial increase. Are we talking there about what Albertans might get from oil and gas, for example, or how high are you kind of picturing that might go?
Well, first of all, Emma, I said no new open pit mines. So I'm not disingenuous. There's certain contractual relationships we have to continue to honor, but we're going to honor those at the same time, make sure we keep the environment clean and people's lives safe. Our number one priority is going to be water and people and wildlife. And we're
Number one priority after all the other number one priorities, which seem to be money. Let's be clear. And I'm gonna foreshadow something a bit here. We're working on a project on the coal mine piece here, and it is probably the biggest project that we've taken on here at the Breakdown before. We're having conversations with a bunch of people who actually know about the things. We're going to be, it's a whole, I don't want to ruin it. It's going to be great. But in those conversations, there's one fact that I think is critically important to understand. And that fact is, in the entire history of coal mining, for sure in the last 50 years, there has not been a single, not one coal mine that hasn't had an environmental disaster. It hasn't had an environmental spill. It's not a thing. So for Brian Jean to get up there and say, oh, no, it's going to be great. We're going to make sure the highest standards, water and people and everything else, those are all super, super important to us. It's more than a little bit disingenuous. And when you talk about the fact that when we're talking about Grassy Mountain in particular, there are experts who believe that going in and remediating the mine will actually increase the amount of selenium that could potentially, and other toxic badness that could be leached into the soil and the water supply. The remediation argument doesn't work so well. But there's a couple of other clips that we want to say, because as the reporter in there did such a great job, I will fan over Emma Graney's work all day, every day, of highlighting Grassy Mountain is exempt from the open pit coal mining. They're allowed to open pit coal mine. Brian Jean went out of his way to label those as advanced projects. So for Brian, when Brian says no new open pit coal mines, he's playing with words a little bit. But just to be crystal clear, another reporter followed up.
How will this affect the Grassy mine proposal?
Well, the Grassy mine proposal, of course, was an exempt mine going forward, but there are absolutely no exceptions in relation to selenium and the effect and the long ongoing scenario of selenium. And the AER is, of course, an arm's length independent regulator, and we're going to make sure that they will be dealing with all of the new mine applications as well as the existing ones.
There has been plenty of reporting that has made it very, very clear that one of the biggest reasons why the AER considered Grassy Mountain an advanced project was because Brian Jean wrote the AER a letter saying, for me, this is an advanced project. It should be exempt. I hope you know that, because that's what I believe as the Minister of Energy. There's no question. To say that the AER at this point, the Alberta Energy Regulator, is arm's length is asking Albertans to swallow a little bit more than is reasonable, especially when you stack on top of that the reality that we have Kevin O'Leary talking about Danielle Smith just going ahead and issuing permits willy-nilly without apparently any work or consideration or assessment by the AER. So Brian Jean has clearly, through his letter, influenced decisions of the AER. Danielle Smith seems to, based on what Kevin O'Leary has said, believe that she can just circumvent the AER entirely. And all of this, again, goes... Brian Jean can say, oh, no, zero tolerance on selenium. There'll be no selenium. I won't have it. There have been no coal mines that have not had major environmental issues in Alberta in the last 50 years, period. So you can say, I won't have any tolerance of it while you're neck deep in it. But it doesn't change the fact that you're neck deep in it. And to really, really hammer the point home, Rebecca Schultz, the Administrator of Environment and Parks, who was at that press conference talking about the wonderful new coal rules, she was asked straight up, can you guarantee that there's not going to be any problems here?
So will you guarantee that there won't be a selenium problem if Grassy Mountain goes ahead?
Here's what I would say. Our job in the Department of Environment is to set the environmental standards. The AER is then the arm's length regulator who ensures that any and all companies, no matter where they are in the province of Alberta, but especially so in southern Alberta, where water and these types of concerns have been raised, that they are adhering to those high standards. If they are not, obviously the AER as the regulator has a number of levers to ensure that they are either brought into compliance or...
So, to be clear, Rebecca Schultz asked, can you guarantee there won't be any selenium? Rebecca Schultz said, well, we're setting the standard that there shouldn't be, but if there is a spill, if there is some sort of major contamination, the AER, which is arm's length, I can't even do it without laughing. The AER, which is arm's length, is they can make sure that they're brought into compliance after the spill, or they're not operating in Alberta again after the spill. Once the toothpaste is out of the tube, there's nothing you can do. It's best not to step on the tube of toothpaste when the lid is off. Just let it sit there. Small little amounts. That's the way you go. That in and of itself, that segment there in and of itself, I recognize is deeply, deeply infuriating, because you have Brian Jean playing that, no new coal mines. We're going to let the Grassy Mountain, the one that's everybody said, 80% of Albertans have said, no, we don't want that one. Thank you very much. We're going to let that one go ahead because I wrote a letter. Sometimes I like to write things. But no new ones. And then we have, oh no, maybe there will be new ones. And a lot of people were confused. They were, what's going on with this? They're okay. What now? All of a sudden, there's no new open pit mines, but we've lifted the rules for mining. And Danielle Smith was back on Your Province, Your Premier this weekend, and she gave her version of how things maybe are going to work now.
So I would say this, that one of the things that we did back in December is we heard all the impact and all the input. We heard that no one wants to see open pit mining in our mountains. No one wants to see mountaintop removal. And everybody's very concerned about what happens when you have selenium runoff, because that's the problem. If you do open pit mining and mountaintop removal, when you have rain, the exposed selenium can leach into the water. We have heard that loud and clear, which is why our policy in December was to ban open pit mining and to ban mountaintop removal for exactly that reason. We don't want to disturb the surface, and we don't want to see selenium get into the water. There are new mining techniques that are underground. And that's what we're looking at, is what are some of the new techniques we could use in order to be able to avoid that surface disturbance. It's like the difference between going after oil sands with mines, like we do in some of our mining operations in Fort Mac, or SAGD, which is doing all the work in the subsurface to bring the valuable product up to the surface. These are the things we have to do, because whether you're talking about steel for wind turbines, or the need to have coal to create solar panels, or you're talking about batteries and all of the critical minerals that are needed to be able to create those, you have to find a way to mine those products so that you can get the wealth out of it, deliver people the services and the energy they need, and minimize the impact on the environment. So I think people should be rest assured we're just not going to allow for development that is going to have that kind of impact on our water. But we also can't take an anti-mining approach, because we can't achieve any of our targets. We can't achieve our green energy targets if we're not prepared to do any mining to get those critical minerals. So I know it's a conversation that's challenging, but this is the reality that we have to have. How do we get the things that we need while having the least impact on the environment? And no open pit mining, no mountaintop removal, protects the water from selenium. That's what we heard, and that's what we're doing.
All right. The decision to lift the moratorium wasn't made to then either appease or cater to the 5 coal mining companies that have launched lawsuits for recovery of costs?
We made the announcement of the policy change to ban open pit mining and ban mountaintop removal and protect waters from selenium in December. We have a better policy. And so that's the policy that's in place.
So you see, Danielle Smith's answer, very, very different from her energy minister's answer, because Danielle Smith seemed to say, no, here's what'll happen. We won't let them do mountaintop removal. We won't let them do the open pit mining, even though Brian Jean, you just literally a minute ago heard him say that they would. We're going to force them to go underground. Because see, if you go underground, you don't have to worry about any of this stuff. And I find myself asking, it is remarkable for the amount of making the situation worse. One would think that a premier so good at digging a hole for herself would know that when you dig a hole, there's the stuff that you take out of the ground, or the conversation, to stretch the metaphor probably to the point of snapping. There's the stuff that you take out of the ground. You have to put that somewhere. It's not always just the coal that you're getting out. There's very often other things, and you have to put those other things, the dirt, the rocks that have the selenium in them and on them, you have to put those somewhere. And you can't put them underground because you dug the hole to get under. It's digging a hole. It's just digging a hole. As soon as you put that stuff out in the elements and it rains, your selenium's going to leach anyways. There's no way to do the things that Danielle Smith is talking about doing without putting the water supply at risk, period. There's just no way to do it. And over the coming weeks, we're talking with the experts who are making it very, very clear there's no way to do it. And so it's wild that Danielle Smith would contradict her energy minister and her environment and parks minister and say, no. Just because Brian said that they're exempt, that doesn't mean that they still get to do the open pit coal mining, even though they do still get to do the open pit coal mining. And this is the problem. This is the fundamental problem, is that we have a government that can't get their talking points in line within their own government. It's inconceivable to me that the Premier of Alberta would do her radio show. It's been a month. I mean, somebody could have said, hey, Danny, we know you're doing that radio show. There's been a lot of talk about this coal mine stuff because it just came up this week. Just so we're all on the same page here. Here's the current position. Here's the state of things. We've written some clever answers for you that you'll ignore. But if you could just take the salient details out of them, that would be delightful. Because we don't want to have any inconsistent messaging that would, I don't know, terrify people or make industry go, what are these people doing? Because one of the biggest things that scares away industry and investment, if it's not a sure thing, because you got a Kevin O'Leary deal with Danielle Smith giving him permits, is what the hell is going on in that jurisdiction? And they can't even get on the same page in regards to this issue that, again, is deeply, deeply decided upon. 80% of Albertans say no. This is a no-brainer. This is an easy win. But they can't get their talking points right on it. And where that gets to be of particular concern, and this is where we bring it back to the Donald. And I want to be clear. The next 20 minutes or however long this goes on for, this is a cautionary thought experiment, is how we're going to present the remainder of this piece, because there's some things that have been missing in the national conversation in regards to the Donald Trump. What's Donald Trump going to do? How bad is he going to do it? What are the things that we have to worry about? And we have seen from multiple levels of government, leaders of government, different interpretations. And before we run down this thought experiment, I want to go back and play one of the clips of the Donald answering the question about what his vision is for Canada.
President, if we were to work under the assumption that you're serious about making Canada 51st state of the United States, the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada said, under no circumstance will it ever be the 51st state.
Maybe he won't win, but maybe he will. I don't care.
You had suggested.
Listen, I don't care what he says.
But Sir, real fast, you said you were considering military force to acquire Panama and Greenland. Are you also considering military force to annex and acquire Canada?
No, economic force, because Canada and the United States, that would really be something. You get rid of that artificially drawn line, and you take a look at what that looks like, and it would also be much better for national security. Don't forget, we basically protect Canada. But here's the problem with Canada. So many friends up there. I love the Canadian people. They're great. But we're spending hundreds of billions a year to protect it. We're spending hundreds of billions a year to take care of Canada. We lose in trade deficits. We're losing massive. We don't need their cars. You know, they make 20% of our cars. We don't need that. I'd rather make them in Detroit. We don't need the cars. We don't need their lumber. We have massive fields of lumber. We don't need their lumber. We have to unrestrict them because stupid people put, restrictions on, but I can do that with an executive order. We don't need anything they have. We don't need their dairy products. We have more than they have. We don't need anything. So why are we losing $200 billion a year and more to protect Canada? And I said that to, as I called him, Governor Trudeau. I said, listen, what would happen if we didn't subsidize you, if we didn't, because we give them a lot of money. We help them. As an example, we're buying icebreakers, and Canada wants to join us in the buying of icebreakers. I said, we don't really want to have a partner in the buying of icebreakers. We don't need a partner. But no right. Nope, no right. Here's what we have. We have a right not to help them with their financial difficulties because we owe $36 trillion too. We're going to start knocking it out pretty fast, but we're going to be able to do it because of energy and other things. But no right. No right. But why are we supporting a country, $200 billion plus a year? Our military is at their disposal. All of these other things, they should be a state. That's why I told Trudeau when he came down, I said, what would happen if we didn't do it? He said Canada would dissolve. Canada wouldn't be able to function if we didn't take their 20% of our car market. They send us hundreds of thousands of cars. They make a lot of money with that. They send us a lot of other things that we don't need. We don't need their cars, and we don't need the other products. We don't need their milk. We got a lot of milk. We got a lot of everything, and we don't need any of it. So I said to him, well, why are we doing it? He said,
So let's be clear. What the now president of the United States was talking about there, what Donald Trump was talking about there, was the idea that Canada is so weak. Canada can't handle the life without the United States. And in some measure, there's no question that the quality of life that Canadians afford is because of the economic trade that goes across the American border. Not debating that. But he said some other things. And those other things are things that people should probably be paying more attention to than they are. When he was asked about Pierre Poilievre, who many expect to be the new Prime Minister of Canada in a couple of months. Well, a few months anyways. What was his response? Maybe he wins, maybe he doesn't. I don't care. He's calling Justin Trudeau, the current Prime Minister of Canada, the Governor of Canada. He does not hold any respect for either leader. Period. End of sentence. And you saw the open contempt in that clip. So he doesn't hold any respect for the leader of the country directly to the north. That's pretty telling about his philosophy in regards to what the dynamic is. When he was asked, hey, you've said you're going to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal using military force if need be. You going to do that to Canada? His response was, no, I'll use economic force. And so as we have politicians and the Premier of Alberta running around saying, what we got to do is we got to get the imaginary fentanyl issue addressed. Let's be clear. When I say imaginary fentanyl issue, I'm talking about the amount of fentanyl that crosses the border from north to south. It is, in regards to the total amount of fentanyl consumed in either country, a rounding error. The vast majority of fentanyl that is used now is produced domestically. Period. End of sentence. Daniel Smith talks about the migrants. Oh, the migrants, the people that are heading south from Canada. There are some people who go use Canada as a gateway to get into the United States. But again, when we're talking about the number, it's a rounding error. It's an inconsequentially small number, especially when you compare that to the southern border. And I'm not trying to throw Mexico under the bus by any stretch of the imagination. What I'm trying to suggest is that perhaps some of the reasons that Trump has justified or voiced publicly that Canadian politicians have jumped onto for the tariffs that he's apparently going to be putting in place on February 1st, maybe those reasons are bullshit. Maybe they're reasons that Americans can get upset about, but that are almost impossible to take any meaningful action on. And this is where it's important to take a look at what else Trump has said about tariffs, because he said at multiple rallies, on the record multiple times, that what he would like to see happen with tariffs is to use the money generated from tariffs to eliminate income tax in the United States. And again, that's a piece that disproportionately affects a certain group. There's a lot of people in the middle to the lower class, the income ranges in the United States, who are going to hear, oh, no income tax. That sounds great. I'd like that, please. Without putting in any sort of consideration or context into how much more expensive life will be with tariffs. The people that not having income tax would most benefit were the ones who were sitting front row and center for Donald Trump's inauguration. All of the tech bros. This is why the term broligarchy has come into fashion, because if Donald Trump goes ahead with his tariff plan, it will disproportionately benefit the wealthy, who pay significantly more income tax by nature of how much money they make. So it'll make their lives, or at least dodging that income tax, a whole lot easier. But you have to ask yourself, why is it that Canadian politicians are looking at Donald Trump's public arguments and they're picking and choosing everything except for the one that we should be the most afraid of? Oh, we got to do the NATO commitments. He's really pissed off about the NATO stuff. We need to get on that. Oh, we got to do the border securing. We got to get on that. Got to get the fentanyl that's crossing the borders. We got to get on that. I don't want to talk about, he says he wants to take us over using economic force, even though those are exactly the levers that he's pulling. And it is not inconceivable in this thought exercise to say maybe those things that are comparatively bullshit, maybe those are pretenses for him getting his tariffs. There's recent polling that suggests that in Alberta, 20% of the population is open to the conversation of, well, maybe we join the United States. Alberta has a lot of resources. This is one of the reasons why Daniel Smith wants to go ahead with the coal mining with strict rules. And Brian Jean wants to go ahead, and Rebecca Schultz wants to go ahead with the coal mining. This is one of the reasons why the oil sands are so valuable. We have a literal Great Lake at the north end of our province full of fresh water. We have lumber, we have oil and gas, and we are just north of the American border. And it's about time that maybe we start to have the conversation about, is it possible, while we're believing all of the things that Donald Trump is saying, that maybe we should believe that one a little bit too? Is it possible that maybe we should think about the possibility that it's not difficult to say Donald Trump rolls out his tariffs on February 1st? That is going to have a massive impact on oil and gas. Now, hopefully, the rest of Canada does what the rest of Canada has committed to do, which, by the way, the Premier of Alberta has not, and make sure that any sort of funding that gets generated from retaliatory tariffs helps to cover the industries that are most hard hit. But if we don't have any sort of retaliatory measures that generate some funds on our side, then it is going to have a massive impact, if there are no carve-outs on oil and gas, in the amount of oil and gas that gets shipped across the border. And for Alberta, that is a tremendous problem. And that is exactly what Danielle Smith is afraid of. Because if all of a sudden the United States stops buying as much oil and gas as they have, they stop shipping across the border as much oil and gas as they have, that has a tremendous impact on royalties, which has a tremendous impact on the Alberta budget. And so there are very real questions to be asked about what the impact of these tariffs could have on the provincial budget coming up at the end of February. Now, there's some other benefits for Donald Trump for tariffs that he's identified as well. He believes, as you heard him say in that clip, we have everything we need here. We have all the oil and gas. We have the trees. We just have to change some regulatory rules. If we change those regulatory rules and we give people a reason to buy American, like making literally every other country's products more expensive, then we will invest in the infrastructure to get our own oil and gas out of the ground. We can cut down all of the trees that people wanted to protect because endangered species. We can do all of those things with an executive order. I can accomplish all of that. So it's also entirely conceivable that another motivation for Donald Trump in regards to the tariffs piece isn't just maybe we can get rid of the income tax and I can make my friends really, really rich here. Maybe it's also that will force massive infrastructure development within the United States. And you have to ask, what are the impacts? What are the conceivable impacts that we could see on a province like Alberta? Because again, the most recent polling suggests 20% of Albertans are open to the conversation of joining the United States, which is, for the record, reprehensible. And to answer that question that way is, in my mind, paramount to treason. Especially with the direction that Trump is taking the country in regards to women's access to healthcare and reproductive rights. There are elementary school kids in the United States right now who are being detained in the hopes that ICE will be able to catch their parents. I got sent multiple news articles yesterday of First Nations inside the United States expressing concern that members of their nations, members of their tribes, members of their bands could be running into problems because if they're houseless or they're homeless and they don't have ready documentation saying, no, I'm like way more American than you, dude, those people could be put in camps or they could be kicked out of the country. This is where we are. And so to not assume that Donald Trump is in some measure telling the truth when he says, oh no, I want Canada to be the 51st state and I'm willing to inflict great economic pain, and watch him take the measures to do exactly that, to not have the conversation about, okay, so like, what if he's serious? What if Donald Trump is serious? What if Donald Trump is willing to absolutely destroy the Alberta economy in the short term in order to get a bunch of people on board with the idea of joining the United States? What if he's using Danielle Smith as the wedge issue to fracture Team Canada, which we're seeing play out in real time? These are all what ifs that nobody's talking about. And I honestly do not know why. What I do know is that I'm hearing from a lot of smart people who are in hushed tones saying all of these things. The number of conversations that I've had in the last couple of weeks with people who are putting together exit strategies in case things get really bad is uncomfortable for me. But it's a reality that very smart people who are familiar with nation building and nation destroying, they're very closely paying attention to what's going on right now. And they're particularly paying close attention to how Alberta is being used as a wedge in Team Canada right now. And as Albertans and Canadians, we should be all paying close attention to that to ensure that that does not happen. Period. If you think that I'm being hyperbolic, and again, I am more than happy to acknowledge that in the absence of Trump saying that's exactly what he is going to do. I mean, he's literally said he's going to use economic force to make Canada the 51st state. I can play the clip again if anybody wants to listen to 3 minutes of it. He's literally said that. If I was saying this in the absence of that, I would be the first to say, oh, Nate, it's time for bed, buddy. It's time for bed. Maybe it's time to take a break. But he's literally said that. And when we take a look at what happened today with Colombia, where for inexplicable reasons, rather than use the traditional pathways of using commercial flights, which are, for the record, way cheaper to move migrants back to their countries of origin. Donald Trump wanted the photo op. So he loaded up a bunch of people from Colombia into an army plane, and then he insisted that that plane be allowed to land. Now, just imagine that, if you will. An unannounced foreign military flight shows up inside of your airspace and says, yeah, no, I'm doing this. I would strongly recommend checking out the president of Colombia's response, particularly his response that he posted on the X machine. Just hit the little translate button, because that dude is showing how you stand up to a bully. And he's sending his presidential plane to go pick up all of those people. There were lots of people who were repatriated during the Biden administration, but they were done so using commercial planes. This is not Colombia saying, no, we don't want our people back. This is Colombia saying, what are you doing on a military cargo plane? This is unacceptable. This is a violation of our sovereignty. You don't get to land your military plane here without permission first. You have to treat our people with dignity. Donald Trump responded to having that plane turned around by immediately launching tariffs against Colombia, by immediately making numerous other threats against Colombia. This is what's happening today. And while we're talking about what's happening today, it's worth sharing this now deleted tweet from Eric Trump. It was only out for about 20 minutes. But the tweet said, any and all who dare to defy the American golden age, heed this warning. You will, all caps, lose. Toe the line, or we will, all caps, run you down. The gloves are off, and we're not playing around this time. For now, it's tariffs, but trust me, we can and will do so much worse. At a certain point, you have to stop and say, wait, what's happening here? Do we need to talk about this? I think maybe we need to talk about this. And it's not paranoid, and it's not conspiracy theory. It is how most people have felt right before major moments in history. And we had a little bit of a conversation around this last night when we were having the conversation with the folks from the AB Resistance. And one of the questions that came up is, well, shit, if Trump's just going to try to take over Canada, what do we do here? And the answer is, I like to think, profoundly Canadian. We don't give in to fear on any level. Do we have to live in a world where we should be prepared for the possibility that Donald Trump is going to inflict tremendous amount of economic hardship on Alberta and the rest of Canada in order to gain access to our resources and our minerals and everything else without having to deal with all of the things that come with dealing with another country? Should we be aware of that? 100% that we should. Should we let that define our existence? Absolutely not. Should we give up on all of the other things that are going on? Absolutely not. And I applaud the folks from the AB resistance who are going ahead trying to hold the provincial government to account by starting the process of getting a recall started. Because what all of these people who are acting in such unbelievably bad faith want is for everybody to just give up and get tired. And I get that all too well on so many days. It's very, very tempting to just go, I just give up. I'm not going to do it. But I remind myself, whenever I feel that way, I remind myself of the legacy that exists for Canadians when it comes back to pushing against threats to our freedom. In World War I, Canadian soldiers were the most feared because Canadian soldiers were absolutely ruthless. They did whatever it took to get the job done. That's just who the Canadian soldiers were. And I've acknowledged in the past that the history of this country is fraught, as the history of any country is. There are things that are in Canadians' history that I am not proud of, but there are absolutely things in Canada's history that I am very much proud of. And one of those things is we are wonderful neighbors. We saw this during 9/11. When there were planes that needed somewhere to land, the good folks out east took them in. They put them in houses. They made sure that they were safe as their country navigated the biggest tragedy in living memory. The wildfires in California. Canadians have sent down water bombers to try to assist people as their cities are burning down. That's who Canada is. But I also really hold in my heart the notion that there is something inherently Canadian in the fuck around and find out. That's the intensity that I'm committed to bringing, as whatever the future holds whatever it does. And that's the intensity that I think we all need to be bringing to the table, because there is no question things are about to get really bumpy. Donald Trump will either put in his tariffs or he won't. Donald Trump will either carve out exemptions in the hopes of creating division in our country, or he won't. But at the very least, we've got to deal with this madman south of the border for the next probably 4 years. Maybe if the senator gets his bill passed, 8. And then who knows after that? We're going to deal with a country that is starting economic warfare with other countries. It happened in Colombia today. If they don't get their way, this is what they're going to do. It's going to be a bumpy road. But we have to hold fast to who we are as a country. The good things about who we are as a country, because that's going to be what gets us through. That's about everything. I'm shocked, for the record, that the Twitter Spaces hasn't been shut down yet. But that's what we got. I want to be clear. We got a lot planned for the next couple of weeks. I'm really, really excited about this project that we're putting together for the Grassy Mountain mine piece. It is, if we're able to accomplish what I'm hoping that we're able to accomplish, it is going to be a new high water mark for us here at the Breakdown. So please stay tuned for that. We're also going to be having some conversations, hopefully in the fairly near future, with members of the disabled community who have had their program funding cut by this province, because that's what we do here now. We punch down on weak people. But I'm also looking forward to seeing what happens with the AB resistance. I know that last night in our program, there were people who were listening to the program who were members of a variety of different communities, including the disabled community, who were like, hey, how do we weigh in on this? I can't do X, Y, and Z, but I sure can do A, B, and C. Tap me in here, coach. And the good folks at AB Resistance were happy to provide lots of different pathways. Check them out at abresistance.ca. Because I think they're gonna send, at the very least, they're gonna send a very, very strong message, and I think that that's critically important. So that's the show for tonight. Like I said, the last chunk was going to be a little bit of a dark ride, but you know what? We got some things planned to help lighten things up a little bit. He looked off to his left. We're going to try to have a little bit of fun as well coming up in the coming weeks. We have no interview show scheduled for this week, so I can't offer any early access to anyone for those things. But if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, you can sign up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/TheBreakdownAB, where when we do have our interview episodes, you get early access there. And also you get the warm feeling knowing that you're helping us to produce the kind of content. We got the fancy new camera now. It's delightful. So you can do that at the patreon.com. If you're somebody who is not into long-term commitment, but you still want to throw the show a little bit of support, then you can always send e-transfers to info@thebreakdownab.ca. And finally, on the advice of more than a few folks, we're keeping the GoFundMe for our legal defense up and running. We're not going to just the goal anymore, but we're going to keep the legal defense up and running for anybody who's unfamiliar with the six... It's so ridiculous. The $6 million lawsuit that I'm facing. You can hop over to www.savethebreakdownab.ca. And if you're feeling so inspired, then you can chip in to help us fight back on that one, because we're gonna, and we're gonna win, I think. So there's all of the plugs. I promised a little bit of levity. I'm not going to forget it, because boy, howdy, do we need a laugh after that rant. So here is your clip.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
I tend to be pretty trusting. That's the person who's going to lead the negotiations with Trump in her head. It's going to go great. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the chat. You guys have been on fire today. I'm scared to read the comments for the last 20 minutes, but I will definitely get into them in just a bit. So thank you to everybody in the chat. Thank you to everybody who's listening live on the Twitter Spaces. If you're watching live on any of our streaming platforms, thanks you for taking your time, choosing to spend some of your time with us here tonight. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, it's not live, but you can also do the reviews and the stars and all of those things on your favorite platform. If you're watching on the YouTubes, smash that subscribe button, hit the little bell thing so you know when we go live and when we post clips and stuff. And that's everything that we got. Thank you all so much. We'll be back next Sunday with another live show. In the meantime, and in between time, as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.